1945, right at the end of the war. So like all those end of the war airplanes, they were either chopped up for scrap or they were sold for salvage. This airplane was sold, I think the first time it sold was in '47, and it sold for $750, full of fuel. Can you imagine? If we only knew right now what kind of deals like that are out there, it's going to be worth $4 or $5 million down the road. So it sold a couple more times, just changing hands. Each time it kind of about double in price. Finally got to see some commercial service. It was used to haul cargo down in the Caribbean for a little while, and then it was used for aerial mapping in the Middle East. And then lastly, it was used as a sprayer, aerial sprayer for fire ants in the southeastern part of the United States. A lot of these end-of-the-war airplanes, bombers that actually saw service, were used as either sprayers or fire bombers. In the early 1990s, 4 gentlemen bought the airplane for $80,000 with the dream of restoring it and then flying around the world. I think after a bit they realized that was a pretty big undertaking and decided to donate the airplane to the EAA. And through the mid-90s, EAA restored the airplane to its current condition, has been flying it, giving rides ever since. So that's kind of what its life has been. It's got about 12,000 hours on the airframe and is really in great shape. I mean, we take real good care of it, but also it's treated pretty lightly. You know, it never carries a heavy load like they would have in the war. You know, we take real easy care of the engines, make it easy on it, want it to last as long as it can. But along with that, on behalf of EAA, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here and flying. Because if you didn't come and participate like this, that airplane would be sitting in a museum and it wouldn't be able to fly. People wouldn't be able to experience it like you're going to. So again, thank you very much for coming out here and doing this. So now let's talk about the war a little bit and the B-17's role. So right before World War II, the United States was doing everything it could officially not to be involved in any of the conflict, being as neutral as possible and staying out of it. In Europe, of course, Germany was starting to gobble up territory. And in the South Pacific, Japan was starting to do the same thing, starting to gobble up parts of the South Pacific.
Oh, okay. I got one. Okay. That's what we actually
As it heated up more and more, all of a sudden we had Pearl Harbor. That drew us into that side of the war. And then as Germany had pretty much taken over all of Europe and was starting to threaten Britain, we got drug into that side of the war. And we were fully involved in the entire World War on both sides of our country. We weren't real well equipped. You know, we had kind of a scaled down military. We didn't have a lot of equipment. And all of a sudden we had to really ramp up to meet the needs. So of B-17s, there were a little over 12,000 B-17s made. So think about that, 12,000 in 3.5 years. That's an incredible pace. To kind of compare it to modern day, Boeing makes the 737, which most of us have flown on. In over a 50-year period, they've made 10,000 737s. Gosh. And they made over 12,000 B-17s in 3.5 years. Now, Boeing couldn't keep up with the pace. They were busy also making the B-29, developing and making the B-29, and a lot of other projects. So they licensed out production of some of the B-17s to 2 other companies. One was Douglas, and the other was Vega, which became Lockheed Vega, and then Lockheed Martin, and that whole string. This airplane was made by Vega in Burbank, California. So 12,000 B-17s in 3.5 years. But that's just one time. They were also, you know, we were also manufacturing B-24s and B-25s and P-51s and P-47s, and then Jeeps and tanks and rifles and ammunition and tents and uniforms. all this incredible amount of equipment that was needed to fight the war. But at the very time, we were also drawing all our young males, send them overseas to fight. So how did we accomplish all that in that 3.5 years?
Women.
And all the people that were back home began rationing and donating and then manning the factories to build all the things that we needed. And you know, with Boeing licensing out building of B-17s, that happened everywhere. The engines on this airplane are Wright Cyclone engines, but Wright couldn't build enough. So two of the engines on this airplane are Studebaker, have Studebaker labels on them, because Studebaker started building under license for Wright's. They built the same engine, but built them for Wright. And this was being done all over the country. Every factory pretty much stopped what they were doing and built something for the war effort that suited what they did. It was an incredible effort. Really as monumental an effort as was done overseas in the actual fighting. So now let's talk about the war side. Let's talk about the crews that were sent over and kind of a little bit about how that went. So the B-17 was primarily used as a long-range bomber against Germany. Some were used in the Pacific, but primarily in Europe. And most of them flew out of England. So they were flying on 8 to 10 hour missions, upwards of 30,000 feet. And at that high, it's about 32 degrees below zero for 8 to 10 hours in an airplane that's not heated or pressurized. You'll see some outlets on the wall of the airplane where you can plug in heated suits or heated underwear, you know, and then they'd wear the heavy sheepskin outer garments. But it's still incredibly cold. Just to survive the flight over and back was amazing. They had to be on oxygen because of the altitude, and you know, you're breathing out moisture that would cause their regulators to freeze up, so they had to keep checking that. They had to keep checking on each other to make sure they weren't passing out, and then parachute hypoxia. So just an incredible ordeal to get to the fight. And then once they got to the fight, they had to endure the flak and the fighters trying to shoot them down. And in the early part of the war, we didn't have the fighter support, the long-range fighter support that we did at the end. So there was a good chance that when you went up in a mission, that 1 in 3 airplanes weren't coming back. That we would lose that many crews in the early part of the war. So think about that. You know, you get ready to get into the airplane to go on your mission, knowing that a third of your buddies are probably not coming back. That you'll get home that evening if you're lucky. Go in your barracks and there's going to be empty beds because some of the guys didn't make it back. And then the next morning you do the same thing again. Mission after mission took incredible courage, incredible endurance. And probably to some degree, you know, because they were young, you know, they still felt invincible and, you know, didn't feel the mortality that some of us feel. So the basic crew, a crew of 10, 4 of them were officers, the pilot, the co-pilot, the bombardier, and the navigator. The other 6 were enlisted. The aircraft commander, you know, the veteran, the old man on the airplane was probably 21 or 22 years old. The youngest, maybe 18, but probably 16 or 17 because they lied about their age to go over and fight. And they did that day after day. And we owe them a great debt of gratitude because if they hadn't done what they did and they hadn't won that war, we would be living in a much different country. We enjoy an incredible amount of freedom and it's very much owed to them. So when we go flying today, if you could just spend a moment when we're up in the air and think about the sacrifice and the effort that they did for us and how lucky we are they did. And then the rest of the time, just enjoy the flight. It's going to be great. It's a wonderful experience and you'll have a great time.